So welcome everyone. My name is Adeline Grard. I am a demographer and I got a PhD in public health too. I'm working at UCLouvain Library and also with the Digital University with Professor Deville. And today I'm going to give you a presentation in 3 times. First, a short introduction about open science and what we are advising you to do in UCLouvain. Then I'm going to make a larger presentation about research data management and more practically, some best practices to use your data in a good way. And finally, I'm going to present you the UCLouvain platform to enter new data management plans, which is DMPonline. But so first, we are going to start with open science in UCLouvain. And I'm so sorry because for this part of my presentation, this is in French, but the rest will be in English. So what is open science? Open science started about in the 90s, and it's a large movement that wants every research outputs to be available to the large society, including, of course, researchers, but also the civil society and politicians, for example. So open science is about transparency of science. It's about reuse of data and research output. It's about making the civil society participating to the research environment. It's about cooperation between researchers because when everything is open, it's of course easier to cooperate between researchers. It's about taking responsibility, but also making research more reproducible. There are many topics in open science. Of course, there is open access to research publication. So if you have any question regarding this matter, I can also answer it at the end of this session if you want. It's also about opening the data, which I'm going to present you in more detail today. It's also about open source software and open education. This is the 4 topics we are handling in the Digital University, and I'm responsible of these 2 ones. What is the advantage for you as a researcher to use and to enter open science? We know that the more your scientific publication and your scientific data will be available to the society, the more your work is going to be visible to others. And so it will increase the citation you're going to receive for your paper. So it's important to put your publication in open access. It may also enhance accessibility and efficiency of your publication results. And it also helps to increase the research integrity. So, for example, you have, when you submit a paper, the journal asks you to deposit your data in order for the reviewers to use your data and check whether your results are correct. So it's one of the aspects of research integrity. What can you do to enhance your open science skills? You can participate in trainings, of course, but we have also lots of tutorials. So if you are interested in this matter, you can go to our website. I'm going to give you the link in my second PowerPoint, but we have lots of information and you can, of course, always contact me. So one of the ways to increase your open science practice is, of course, to publish all your paper on DL, which is in fact an obligation since 2018. You can also publish in Gold Open Access reviews, which is also a good way to open up your scientific results. You can publish your data on our Dataverse. So this is a data repository that we have created in UCLouvain, but I'm going to go back on this matter later. And you can publish your codes and programs and algorithms on the Forge UCLouvain in open source, of course. And this is, of course, we have in a political point of view, we are engaged since Louvain 2020, but now in the Horizon 600 plan, to make the UCLouvain more open. And so you can have access to this report if you want, which is the strategic vision of UCLouvain regarding open science. So now I'm going to present you a brief introduction to research data management and data management plans. Maybe put this down. So this presentation is in two parts. The first one concerns research data management. What is it? What are the main steps? And what are the advantages for you as a researcher? And then the second part is really dedicated to planning your data management and using data management plans as a tool for your research project. So what is research data management? It's actually something very large, which contains all the research steps that aim to create, organize, make accessible, store, share, and make your data in conformity with ethical and legal issues. And by research data, we mean all the factual materials that is used to that is viewed as necessary to validate your research findings. So everything that helps you create a research output is actually a data. So it can be Excel files, of course, but it can be also photos and pictures in some disciplines. It can also be videos, it can be text, it can be a lot of things. So keep an open-minded when you are thinking about data. What do we have to start making good research data management? So, as you know, all here, I think, we are living in a large digital world, and data are central in the research in a research project. We know that a researcher stays, for example, 70% of his time behind his computer to make his research. It's, of course, much more in some disciplines, but yeah, we are all working with data and we don't know what to do with this data. In parallel, we are living a trust crisis in science, as the COVID pandemic has largely shown, but it started a bit earlier when some researchers started to reproduce research output and cannot find the same result as the one that had been published. And so it started a trust crisis in science. And we think that opening up the data and opening up the research result may help to tackle this trust crisis in science. It's of course related to the open access movement, and open access started in the 90s, but now we are also wanting to make the data as well as the paper in open access. It's also a good way to meet the researcher needs. As I said, we are handling data all the time, but sometimes we do not know what we can do or not with this data. There is the GDPR, there is all these commercial and legal issues with the data, and we cannot know for sure what we can do or not with data. And research data management wants to help you in this matter. And it's also a good way to reach excellence in science, as we know that the universities that have started to develop a research data management service are better ranked in international university ranking. So for example, in Belgium, we have the University of Ghent, which is the really leader in research data management and is the first in Belgian rankings. One important difference in research data management is the FAIR principle versus the open data principle. So open science means open data, of course, but not all the data can be made open. You have the GDPR, you have the ethical, the legal issue, you have sometimes commercial contracts with people that want you not to publish your data. And so all the data may not be made available to everyone. And so the international organization, including the European Commission, but also the OCDE, has started to use the fair data principle, which means that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Which means that everyone should be able to find your data using a digital object identifier, for example, so which is a permanent link to your data. It also has to be accessible, so your data should be deposited in a data repository on which everyone can go and download your data. Data should be interoperable as much as possible. So by this word, we mean that other researchers should be able to use your data as long as possible and as easy as possible. So in this matter, make sure to make your data in a format which is easily readable by others, like a CSV files, for example, but a PDF, and all open source software that make open source expansion, which is of course more easily to acquire for researchers than commercial solution. But it's not all to make your data open and available. It's also important to document your data, because you can have a really nice data set, but if you have not the information to read this data, so for example, a codebook, or a way to explain what means each variable in your data set, you are not able to use it correctly. So it's one of the 4 principles also to have a good documentation of data, and it's also have a matter with the metadata, so the data that describes the data. It's really important to take really care of this metadata, which are, for example, the name of the authors of the data set, the year of the data collection, but also the keywords. It's always important to choose your keywords really carefully, because it's all your data set will be findable by others. So research data management concerns every step of a research project. We start, of course, with the planning, but in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the planning at the end. It is also concerning the searching, the data collection part. It also helps you to store your data carefully. It helps you to publish and share your data to the community. But I think it's also important to take advantage of the research data management skills that you have developed during your research, for example, during your PhD, and to be able to make them visible and to promote them. So I also will take some time to go on this. So the first step is to search for existing data or collecting data. Yes, not everyone is collecting data all the time. There is, in fact, a lot of researchers that are using data collected by others. And when they use data collected by others, they have to cite them. And so they have to cite them. And so the principal author of the data set receive credits for the data management work they have done. So it's a good way also to increase the impact of your work during your research career. So it's important, first of all, to state why I should use data collected by others. First of all, imagine you are doing your PhD and you are writing the introduction of your thesis, and you want to build the case over your research question. It can be a really good idea to go on several databases and to use data collected by others to illustrate what you say in your introduction. It can also be a good way to save time and money. You want to answer a research question, you don't receive funding to collect your own data, but you find on the internet a great database that address the same question as you. So you can use this data set to answer your research question and publish about it. So it can be a really good way to save money and to publish anyway. It can also be really interesting to use data collected by others during the discussion section of your thesis or in your paper. For example, to compare the results you have found with those collected in other countries or in other time in order to show an evolution of a difference between countries. So it's always a good reason to have a look on the internet and look whether there are data available on your topic. And to do so, it will, in practice, it will really depend on your discipline. So I don't have one and unique solution as Google Scholar is, or Google in general for research data. This is really not the most strong part of research data management yet, because Google has its research tool for data, but it's not really good. So I'm going to give you this solution and let you find by yourself whether it's good for your discipline. There is EOSC, which is the European Open Science Club, and which harvests all the European data repository, most of it. And so you can go there, and they are a pretty nice research engine. You can also go to Retrieve Data, the fourth solution, which is kind of great for many disciplines, but not all of them. But if you go on Retrieve Data, you can find data repository really easily. So it's a really good solution. And if you are looking more for tables that are already done, you can go to Zanran and search for tables that are already made. Let's go to the data collection step. This is some best practices to ensure the quality of the data you collected, but of course it's really brief. And if you want more information about it, please ask the SMCS, for example, but also your fellow colleagues in your disciplines. The first one is to really calibrate the instrument to check the precision of it. It's silly, it can be silly, but it's really important. And by instruments, I also mean questionnaires. So if you are displaying questionnaire to people, it's always important to test them before going to the data collection step. It will help you to state whether there is bias or problem with the scale of the understanding of the questions. It's also interesting to take multiple measurements, observation and samples, of course. It's always a good idea to check your instruments with an expert. So peer review do not only concerns your publication. You can choose peer review at every step of the research project. So when you're planning your data collection, it's always good to ask one of your colleagues or one of the experts in your field to check whether he agrees of the way you ask questions, for example. And it's of course always a good idea to use standardized published methods and protocol of data collection. And now I'm going to go on the data management step, which consists of entering, checking, cleaning, organizing, and documenting your data. And I did this part with the SMCS. So if you have a particular question regarding this or your project in particular, can ask me, of course, but I may probably give you the link to the SMCS. Most of you will use data entry in order to make the data you collect digital. It's not the case in all disciplines, but in many, yeah, it's the case. And most of you will use Excel as a data entry sheet, which is not made for. So we really advise you to create a data entry screen in order to avoid the problem in data entry. For example, when I started as a researcher, I was responsible of a database that has been entered both in the UCLouvain and both in UCLouvain. And all my colleagues in UCLouvain have entered the data in an Excel file. And it took me 1 month to correct all the errors that were there. So it's really important for you to save time and to be efficient to have a data entry screens. It's also important to use controlled vocabularies and to, for example, choose a choice list to minimize this problem of manual data entry. Of course, when you realize when you make your data onto screen, it's always important to have clear labels and to avoid confusion. And once you create your data onto screen, it's always important to have in mind all the different databases you are creating are going to be connected with each other. So, for example, if you're using SQL, it's really important to think about that beforehand. Then you have the data check step, which consists of cleaning, verify, and validate your data. There are, of course, automated procedures, but also manual ones. For example, if you have entered a lot of questionnaire in a data entry screen, it's always a good idea to take a sample of them and to re-enter the data, and then to compare the double data entry and to state the margin of error of the data entry. There is always mistakes during data entry, but the objective is, of course, to minimize them. It's also always a good idea to make statistical analysis of your data, such as frequency and displaying graphs in order to see whether there are data that seems incorrect. And of course, to use peer review. Sometimes we spend a lot of time on our databases and we just don't see anymore the problems, and it's always a good idea to ask someone to have a look at what you've done. And then there is the data cleaning part. So for example, it's always a good idea to think about how you are coding the missing value. So it's really different to code, I don't know, I don't want to answer, I was not there to answering. This is 3 different missing value and they should be coded differently. One of the first principle of databases is to have individual or observation in line and variables in column. It's really important you do that in order to use software for analyzing your data. It's always important also if you are using softwares to analyze your data to make the variable names in the first line, because it will really help during data importation. And for this same matter, it's also important to withdraw the useless lines and columns. So please avoid to have blank lines and blank columns. It will go messy in your data. When you import your data, it's always important to look at the number of observation before and after the importation. They should be the same, of course. And then there is, you should also look for duplicate observations. So for example, you display a frequency analysis of one variable, which is different from one individual to another, and to look whether they are a double same entry. And to look for consistency between your variables. So for example, you take 2 variables that are really close, that should be logically connected, and to say whether, and to correlate them in order to see whether they are linked to each other. So for example, if one woman say, I have a second child, it's always interesting to look whether she said that she has a first child too, to see whether the observation and the coding is correct. Now I'm going to leave the databases and to talk to you about how organizing your files during our research project. It's about reusability of your work. So if you are working for several years as a researcher, you have a lot of files that you haven't touched for at least 5 years. And if you go on this file, you will not find what you want because everything is messy. And so it's always important to have in mind how to organize your file. And it's even more important if you're working with many people, with a lot of colleagues, and that some colleagues will leave soon because they are postdoc, and so they are only going to stay there for 1 year. And in the university, there is a lot of turnover, and it's really important that everyone in your staff and in your team use the same organization categories. So for example, a good way to do it is to have one file by research project, of course, and in this file to have one file for each research step. So administrative data, data collection, data management, data analysis, reporting, publication, and so on. And then in these files, you can separate the completed from the ongoing work. And it forces you to regularly look whether the material is done or is still in use. And so it will help you to have a good practice of data storage. It's important to name the folders appropriately. So don't name the folders according to the name of the person, but according to the work they are doing. And so take some minutes at the beginning of the research project to say, okay, we are going to work like that, and to use and to put them on the Oasis of the UCLouvain, which is backed, which is really important, of course. That's the same for the files and the documents. It's important to have a common vocabulary and to have a name that makes you understand what's in the file without opening it. For example, to put the dates, to put whether if many people have reviewed the document, to put their initials and to put the number of the version of the document. And it's also important to avoid using the term final, because I think that we have a lot of documents that are named finals in our files, which are not finals at all. And so you should avoid to use them and to prefer a versioning and initials with date way of doing. So if you want more information of this topic, you can also contact the SMCS or me, of course. And now I'm going to present you the storage and protection of your data. And Thomas, if you have some things to do, to say, and you are welcome to intervene. I got 3 best practices to store your data. The first one is to avoid to store them on your computer. There are a lot of people that are losing their data because they were on the computer and the computer crashed, or they lost their computer or the computer has been stolen, and then all their PhD is gone in just one moment. And so it's, of course, important to put them on a server solution. You should keep 3 copies of important data. One of your computer is okay, but take time to deposit 2 of them outside of your laptop, and for example, on the Oasis server of the UCLouvain. And it's important to keep several versions of the data if they are not too big, because if you have handling huge data, it's really complicated to keep lots of versions of your data. But if you are working with gigabyte or maybe 1 tera maximum, it's doable. So keep at least the raw data, so the one you have entered without any cleaning. Then the cured one, the one with when you have cleaned everything and when you have created your main indicators. And the last one, which are the one for the publication. So you should have this habit when you submit a paper to save the database that you used for this paper, because from the moment you deposit your paper and the moment you are receiving the revision, there are maybe 6 months that have passed. And during these 6 months, you will have worked on your database. And so your database will have changed in the meantime. And so when one of the reviewers say, okay, you should redone the table 2, then you are going to use the new database and the result will be different. So always keep the version of your data set that you use for the publication. So what can you do in practice to store your data at the UCLouvain? I always advise to use the Oasis server, which is backed regularly and which has all the security measures that are guaranteed, and which also comply with the GDPR in English, yeah. Because the GDPR ask that personal data should be stored in Europe, that data collected in Europe should be stored in Europe. And so regarding the GDPR, you should not use this kind of solution like Dropbox, Google Drive, and every cloud solution that is stored abroad. We have also a OneDrive solution and a SharePoint solution, but SharePoint is for really small files. OneDrive is okay, but only maybe for a limited time period. So don't put your archives on OneDrive. If you have to transfer large data set to trusted peers, you can use Transvault, which is also a solution offered by the university. And never use Dropbox or Google Drive for your research data, because we have no guarantee that they are not going to look at your data to use them, or that your data will be once deleted. So it's really important to use the UCLouvain solutions. Sometimes what you are doing in your research is patentable. So maybe you can use your data in the future for a patent. And if you think that it's going to be the case for you, maybe you should contact the Louvain Transfer Technology Office. They are going to give you all the advices to handle your data, to handle your research project in order to make it easier to make a patent afterwards. So it's important to think about it before starting your research in order to have all the information beforehand. And now I'm going to present you the publishing and sharing of data. You will not have to publish all the data you have collected. This is a nonsense. You always have to select the data for publication. And how are you going to choose which data should be selected or not for publication? First of all, is to look at your legal engagement. So for example, in your consortium agreement, there may be stated that some data will not be published, or that some data should be published, like when you're signing a consortium agreement with the European Commission, you should open your data that have been collected in this project. And then you should also look at the GDPR requirements. So we have a data protection officer here in Louvain-la-Neuve, and she can help you to decide whether this data is publishable or not. But personal data should never be on a data set in open access. So for example, the address, the name, the telephone number of people should never be accessible for download. And for all the other data that your research project has created, you should think about the uniqueness. So for example, in social science, when you ask someone their opinions, and then you go back 2 days later and you ask them the same question, the answer will be different. So the answer collected in the first time are unique. You cannot replicate them, but in some technical science, you can replicate the data using the same machines, and maybe they are less unique than some other data. This is you to decide. You should also take into account the long-term value and potential of reuse. So for long-term value, it will really depend on your discipline. So in some disciplines, data are obsolete in 5 years, but in other disciplines, it may take 50 years before them to be obsolete. And you should also think of the potential of reuse. So for example, in the database that I have created for my PhD, there were a set of questions about student harassment, and we did not have time to address this question in our questionnaire. And so we published the data, and we hope that one day a researcher interested in student harassment will look at our database, use it, and cite us for our data management work. And the potential of reuse is also interesting. So you are the best knower of your discipline and your research topic. And so you can say whether your research fellow or the civil society or the association in this field, keep it large in your mind, may want to reuse your data later. It's always important to keep the data you use in your publication, of course, but you can also think of the data that can be interesting in your teaching world of other research. You should also take into account the cost of saving and publishing the data. If you have a really large data set and that you have to document it, it takes time, and so it may take money, and it's not always a good solution to do it. So it's up to you to state whether it's a good idea or not. And depending on all of that, when you are depositing your data on a data repository, you could say and look whether the data repository allows you to publish the data for 5, 10, 20 years. And if you want, it can be shorter too. Or to choose a data repository. In the literature, the first advice is to look for a disciplinary repository. And to do so, you can go on Retrieve Data and type one of your research keywords and see whether there are good data repository for your discipline. But if there are not, you can, of course, ask your colleague whether they know a good data repository. But you can also use general repository that are hosting all the disciplines, like our data repository in UCLouvain, which is the dataverse of the UCLouvain. And there are sub-dataverses for each research institute, so it's really easy to use. And there is also the catch-all repository called Zenodo, which is really great and really well known in the scientific community, which is maintained by the CERN, so it's also good for RGPD. So you can choose one of these solutions. But if you are using a disciplinary repository, it's important to look whether they are checking this condition. First of all, it should give you a digital object identifier. This is the first important condition. It's the only way to your dataset to be findable by other, but it's also the link that everyone is going to use to refer to your paper, to your dataset. You should also have a look at the conditions and see whether long-term preservation is guaranteed. You should have a look at the cost, and for any open solution, you should know that the less it costs, and the more trustful it is. So avoid the solution that are proposed by the editors. So when you're publishing a paper in one of Elsevier journal, they say, oh, okay, you can put your data there. This is a great data repository. It will cost only $500. Please avoid this commercial solution and go to more open ones like Zenodo, UCLouvain, and other open source data repository. Have a look at where the data will be collected if you are using personal data, and look whether the data repository is giving you a license. And the last point is about certification. So there are some certificates for data repository quality. And so if you see, for example, data seal of approval, you can go on. This is a good repository. But let's have a look at what is a license of data. Maybe you have heard about Creative Commons license, no? Creative Commons are ready-to-use licenses that are really largely known in the scientific community. They are really easy to use because you have to decide 3 points. First one, what people can do with your data. Can they replicate them? Can they modify them or not? This is really you to choose. The first one is to what purpose data can be used. Is it possible to use it for teaching, for research, or for a commercial use? For example, I made my thesis on tobacco use among adolescents, and I didn't want the tobacco industry to access my data. So I restrict the access to research and teaching news. And the third condition is whether people should give you credit when they use your data. And this is, of course, something that I really strongly advise you to do, is to use a CC BY license that forces people that will use your data to give you credit and to cite you when they will use your data. So you can go on the website of Creative Commons, but in practice, when you are contacting the data repository, you can say, okay, I want this type of Creative Commons license, and most of the time they accept it. Sometimes you are handling data that are really personal, complicated, difficult. And in that case, you can make a data sharing agreement, which is a step forward from the license. It's more like a contract between you and the people who are going to use your data. And you can go on my website, and there is an example of research data sharing agreement. But for example, you can put in your data sharing agreement that you want people to complete a form about and describe the research topic, where they are living, for which university they are working for, and in order for you to give access to your data and have a check on it before giving access to your data. This is always possible. Another way to take advantage of your data, for example, during your PhD, is to publish a data paper. So a data paper is a scientific paper that describes what you've done for producing your data and for managing them. So there is more and more journals that are dedicated to data papers, but there are also general journals in your discipline that may accept data papers. You, of course, as for any publishing solution, has to check whether this is a peer-reviewed journal, of course. But it can be a good way to take advantage of all the work you've done during your PhD or during a research project to create your data. For example, as far as I'm concerned, I spent 1 year creating my database and my codebook to collect the data. And so making a data paper is a good way in such a case to report on your data work and to also give you credit for your PhD because it's a publication. So it's a win-win situation. Sometimes you want to state for an embargo period. So for example, for several reasons, in your research project, you say, okay, I spent 2 years collecting and managing my data, and now the research project is over, but I want me and my research fellows to have 2 years to publish the data, to publish papers about the data before making the data available to other in open data. This is always possible. This is called an embargo period. And when you are contacting the data repository on which you want to deposit your data, you should say whether or not you want an embargo period and for how long. And so this is the last part of this presentation on research data management, which is about how make your work visible and how to promote your research data management skills. What you can do, for example, is to link your paper with your data. So for example, on DIAL, there is a special place where you can put the link to your data set. This is a good way, but reversely, you can also put the paper that are related to a database in most repository. So there will be a nice circle of citation between your papers and your databases. And so people that are reading your paper will say, oh, the database seems cool. And then they are going to look at your other papers, and this is good for your research career. So don't hesitate to link the two of them. For example, via your ORCID profile. This is also a good way to do it. You can also spread the news on social media. For example, Twitter, which is largely used in many community disciplines, scientific disciplines, to spread the new things that that you have produced. But you should never put your paper on social media. You should put it on DIAL and then put the link to DIAL on the social media. Because Twitter, but also ResearchGate, they are commercial solutions. And so if you put papers directly on it, you are not legally correct, because according to your copyright with the editor, you should only put your paper on an institutional repository, which is DIAL for us. So never put your paper on ResearchGate unless this is gold open access. And so researchers that will use your data will cite your data set and you will receive credits for it. It's the main reason why to make research data management. And you should keep in mind that promoting your research data management skill is a good, it's a valuable asset for the employers. So if you, which are academic or not, but people in enterprise really want, are really looking for data managers. So it's always good to put your research data management skill on your curriculum, on your resume. But it's also a good asset for your research project. So when you are completing a research proposal, they ask you to describe your research environment. And it's always a good idea to say, okay, we have a good research data management skill in our institute, and we are really good data handlers. It can always be a nice asset in your proposal. I made some list of good data management skills that you can develop during your research career. So you can, of course, go to my website to have a look at that. So to sum up, what are the main advantages for researchers to use research data management? First of all, it helps planning your research, as I'm going to present you just after. It increases the use of good data management best practices, and so it helps you to create data, but in a good way. You can access data collected by others, and you can give access of your data to others. But keep this sharing in control, so you are not afraid with the GDPR anymore. You know that you have to contact Michel Remy if you have a problem. You can get cited for your data. You can increase the visibility of your papers and your work in general. It helps more generally the transparency and the reproducibility of results and science in general. So it helps to tackle the trust crisis that I told you about at the beginning. You can get more from your data. So when you don't have the time to use all your data that you have collected, then other people can work on it. And it's a good way to take advantage of your data. It helps yourself to find your data back and to be able to use them 5 years later. So if you document well your data and if you have a good data organization in your field, your files, it's going to be much easier to reuse your own data in 5 years. You can store and backup your data safely and avoid data losses. But it can also be a good way to start a collaborative work with people that are making the same kind of work as you do, but abroad. So have a look at the data set that exists on the internet and start working with people that are creating same kind of data set as you do. And last but not least is that sometimes it's mandatory. So you have to know that the European Commission, BELSPO, and the ERC, but also FNRS is starting to do it. They all ask you to complete a data management plan. And as far as the European Commission is concerned, for example, to put your data in a data repository. So it's getting more and more mandatory. So maybe in 5 years, we are all going to put our data in open. So let's go on data management plans. So I think you have understand, I hope so, that data are the core part of all research projects, and it's important to manage them carefully. You have to know that data management plans are increasingly required by funders. So Horizon 2020, FWO, BELSPO, FNRS, all of these people are asking you to complete a data management plan once you're making a research proposal. And sometimes many of you told me that this is an additional administrative load, which has limited importance. I can hear that, but as far as I'm concerned, I want to show you that there are many advantages of making a data management plan. But you should invest time to do it at the beginning of your project, and it's going to make you save time later. So a data management is actually a backbone of your project. It will guide all of its organization. So for example, I'm going to talk about my own experience. I was data manager of a large European project, and we were collecting data in 6 different countries. And we all started the data collection approximately at the same time. And I have written down all the data collection steps and important things that people should keep in mind during data collection. And I wrote it down and made it available to everyone. And so once we started the data collection time, I received no emails of people asking me, what should I do? I don't remember. What can we have to do to the students? No, everything what was written down, all the materials were also available. And so it was really much easier for people to have a look at it, and I was sure that everyone was following the same procedure. This is really important for data quality and data comparison. So it's a common document which is written and everyone can refer to it at any time. And as far as data management and project management is concerned, it's really important to have that. In data management plans, one of the most important questions is actually the responsibility question. So one of the data management plan question is, which is responsible for data management? And this is a question which is really important because in many research projects, data management is made by a postdoctoral researcher or a doctoral researcher. And those people leave the university. And then the PI and the academic is staying at the university, and 5 years later, he wants to use the data, but sometimes the data have disappeared. And most of the time, there is absolutely no documentation of the data. And so the PI stays with a data set that it cannot use anymore. So it's really important to state the responsibility of this PhD postdoc, to say that he has or she has to document all the data and he is responsible of good handling of the data. And that after he leaves, this is the PI which is responsible of data management. This is something all people starting a research project should think about. You have to know that, of course, you start to write your DMP at the beginning of a project, but it's like every other thing, it's your research project. It's always, you can always modify it and upgrade it during your research project. And so the main advantage is that it makes you save time at later stage. So I told you my story about the data collection phase, but it's true for any phase of your research project. And it's also, the data management plan is really useful when you have to write reports or the method section of a paper. For example, you have to report to the European Commission. You take your data management plan and you say, okay, we are there. And you add some information and your report is made up. For the method section, it's always the moment you're asking what was the participation rate in my study, what was the grant number of my application, all this information that you have to go on several files to find back and are actually going to be on your DMP. So it's going to be much easier to write this section of your paper. In UCLouvain, as in most of the other universities in Belgium, but UCLouvain and Saint-Louis, we are using DMPonline, which is an open source software developed by the Digital Curation Center. If you have time, let's go to the Digital Curation Center website. There are so many good information about data and qualitative data, quantitative data. There are a lot of really good information there. They are really a precursor in this field. Data management plan via DMPonline are really good because you can share it and edit them with your international research partners. So you can share your plans with all your partners, and everyone can collaborate to it. And we have recently updated it to a DMP roadmap version. And now on DMPonline, you have also the official registry of RGPD for UCLouvain. So you have a plan, and you have also a way to declare your data on the official registry of UCLouvain. You have to know that this is mandatory if you are handling personal data since 2018. So not all the people do it, but I have to say that this is mandatory to do it. So in DMPonline, there are two kinds of documents. There are the templates. Templates are the different version of the DMPonline, because European Commission, BELSPO, they all have a different version of DMP. But we can customize them to make them specific to UCLouvain, but also to some discipline if you want. So if in your research institute you are interested in creating your own data management plan, it's always possible. You just have to contact. And there is what we call guidance, which are all the information that helps the researcher to answer the question. We have also suggesting answers, and yeah, we have been really working on giving you the more appropriate information for you to answer the DMP as easily as possible. These are the main steps to go on it, but I'm going to show you directly the platform. So you just go on DMPonline. You have here the list of all the university and research center that are members of DMPonline in Belgium, and you click on UCLouvain. You see, yeah, there is just University of Liège. This is the same, okay. But of course, if you click on UCLouvain, you are going to identify yourself with the shibboleth. And you are access to a version of DMPonline which is customized for UCLouvain user. And if you go for the University of Liège, you will have the same kind of customization. So first, the important parts. There you have the website of UCLouvain, if you want to go back to UCLouvain. Then you have the website that I have created with all the information about research data management. Then you have a large tutorial on GitHub to help you create a plan, etc. So if you don't want to listen to me anymore, there is the tutorial. And you have this address. It will give you my email address directly, and you can send me an email if you have any problem with the platform. So you have a dashboard. Mine is really huge because I create plan every day. But this is really interesting for you if you have if you are going to do several plans in your research careers, because there is this action which is really interesting, is that you can copy a plan and paste it. So if you are for example, making a research proposal for the FNRS, and then this is rejected, but you want to submit it to BELSPO, you could easily copy the plan. This is a really nice possibility. Here are the references. So if you click on it, there. If you click on it, you have the Word and PDF version of DMPonline. This is interesting if you have research partners abroad, for example, in Africa, in places where the internet connection is not really stable. And so you can send them the Word file and they can send it back to you. So if they cannot connect to the platform for an internet service reason, they can always have a Word of PDF version. Then the most important button is here, which is create plan. So you click on create plan, and you have two questions to answer. First of all, you have to give a name to your plan. This is mandatory. And you have this this button here if you are creating a plan for a testing reason, like I do every other day, to show you how to use DMPonline. But for example, if you want to use it in one of your courses, which I do for my demographic students, you can also click on the project. You see that there is already your research organization, which is stated. It will actually link the guiding information to your plan. So it's interesting to just let it the Université Catholique of Louvain. And you can look for the funder. So for example, if you are making a plan for BELSPO, you tap BEL and you have the BELSPO. But you can also, if you cannot find it, for example, you type FNRS, you don't find it. So you click here, no funder, and then you have access to all the plans that I customized for UCLouvain. There are two of them. There are the UCLouvain, which I really strongly recommend for PhD students, and the WellBio FNRS, because the FNRS has not, I had to create it for them, for the WellBio call. But so you can go UCLouvain and create the plan. First, you can give information about your project. This is really important for me to receive the abstract of your projects, because as you can see here, you can always request feedback about your plan. So when you are writing down your plan and you think that you have a good first version of your plan, you go on request feedback and you click on this button, and I'm going to receive an email that say, hey, Adeline, someone has requested feedback on his plan. And so I have to read your plan, but it's really complicated to understand every plan if I don't have the abstract of the project. So you should put the abstract of your project, at least for myself. You can put all the administrative information here, the starting and ending date of your project, the grant number, which we all lost at a moment. And so it's always interesting to put it there. And you see, here you select the guidance. So you can select Université Catholique de Louvain by default. You can add the one of the Digital Curation Center, but I took a lot of inspiration in my guidance from them, so maybe it's not really interesting. But once again, if you or your research institute wants to create your own guiding information for you, researcher in particular, we can always add guidance group here. So if you want to create this kind of guidance specific to your discipline, you can contact me, and this is going to be available on the platform. There you have the different section of the plan. So UCLouvain template is the DMPonline. GDPR is the GDPR registry of the UCLouvain, and DPA, IA are a complementary question from the GDPR to analyze the impact of your sensitive data. So the UCLouvain template is really easy. It goes with your research project steps. So it starts with data collection, then you have the documentation, the legal aspects, the storage and backup, how you will select and preserve the data, how we will share it, and which are the responsibility. I'm not going to present you all this section, but maybe we can have a look to see the general aspect of the DMP. So you click on the plus and you have the question. What is the purpose of the data collection and its relation to the objective of the project? So it's really a research question. So you can see that there is no guidance, but there is a comment section. So for example, if you are working on a project that has several work packages, and many people are working on it, it's there that you can say, okay, the responsible person of the work package 2 should also put information here. So you can always leave comments for your collaborators. And so you write down your answer here and you save it at each time. Another type of question. So what data will you collect or create? This is the kind of question that there is in all kind of data management plan. And so I give you information here, the question to consider for answering the question. So for example, you have to think about the type of data, the formats, and the volumes of each data you collect in your project. That can be set really easily. I use a CSV file from about 20 gigabytes, and this is quantitative data. It can be just as simple as that. And you have to think about this question too. Are you choosing a file format that is good for your discipline in your field of research? Is it going to be a format that is suitable for a long-term utility? So if it's always important to choose a format that can be reusable in 10 years, for example. And you have to also think whether you are going to use data that has been collected by others, because you also have to include them here. And here you have the complementary information. So about data collection, I give you some advice to answer this question. And you always have this section with the research data management email address, which is the same as mine, and the link to the website that I created with all these complementary information on this matter. And so you can do it for each section. Of course, you don't have to do it in one time. You can save and come back later. And once you have one good version of your data, you can request feedback from me. Another thing that is interesting in this platform is to share it with your research partner. So you can write down their email. It does not have to be a Belgian university email address. It can be any email address, but in order to be connected, people should have an ORCID ID, okay? So if you are not member of one of the Belgian universities that are member of DMPonline, you can access DMPonline.be with your ORCID ID. And so you can give them permission to be co-owners, so they can share the plan, they can request feedback and so on. They can just be editor of the plan, and you can also give permission to read only, for example, for your students or other less important people of your research project. And once you have done with your plan, or once you have to include it in your research report, You click on download, you select a format, and you select what part of your plan you want to include, for example, an answer question or not. You have some possibility to customize it, but there are really not many of them. And you can download your plan. So if you want to try to make a data management plan for your PhD or for your research project, you can always try to make one, and you can ask me, and I'm going to give you a feedback on it. I'm also regularly organizing workshops to complete data management plan in small teams. This is also possible. I think I just have one left in this semester, but I can also organize it in research institute if you want. So I have done with my presentation, Thomas.